Hey, man, you just dropped that bombshell of obviously what Pete Thamel was reporting. I was over here, searching through Roback actually trying to use your promo code. So that's what I was doing during the
Hey,
break, and then you dropped that bombshell. It's a good deal, by the way. I mean, look,
yeah,
it's a really, really good deal. But hey, man, always happy to join. And there seriously is no off season, especially with all the craziness we've seen so far in January.
for sure. First off, please do use that promo code because it'll make us look good. I'm just looking at your background here, Bryce, with the Masters stuff, the Brave stuff. I was just thinking at the top of my head,
Yeah.
Braves fan day. We'll be there, by the way, for those who are wondering. Not that
Oh.
I'm inviting the live show. Why not? We'll just have a little gathering together. Braves fan day coming up January 27th, I think it is. Either way, dude, great to have you on, man. So you were doing Georgia Tech stuff before. You got the Crowded Booth
Mhm.
podcast. You still do. You still have some of that Georgia Tech flavor. This past season, your first season covering LSU. Talk about the contrast, the differences. I don't think it's throwing shade at Georgia Tech to say football is different on the Bayou than it is in Atlanta. So, what were the differences? Some things you like, some things you missed about the Tech beat versus LSU. And again, it was a fun season for you in that first season.
Yeah, man. Look, I mean, you're always grateful for where you come from, and the guys over at Georgia Tech were able to kind of give me a chance to get my feet wet in the sports media industry. And look, it's a beat that is, yeah, it's in Atlanta, but it's just so overshadowed by every single other program that's over there. And so you really get to kind of create it your own, and you get to be creative with it. So that's what we were able to do. And we've been blessed to really kind of carry through even out through last season as kind of just like an independent podcast and really just kind of talk, shop with fans. And so that was a blessing. But man, you look, I grew up an SEC fan, an SEC guy. You know as well as I do. I mean, it's just different. And to go from, and this is no shade, a stadium that seats 50,000 to a stadium that seats over 100,000, playing with a Heisman Trophy winner and just all the legends that have come through Tiger Stadium. It's unbelievable. And so it's been a great season to kind of watch, and cover a guy like Brian Kelly, which, he's never not in the limelight of the college football landscape in the world. It was a blessing. And man, I can't believe that we're sitting here in January because it feels like we were just getting ready for fall camp. I think I hopped on your show during August and we just kind of sat there, we're talking shop right after SEC Media Days. And now we're trying to look forward to going to Dallas and cranking it all up again.
Hmm. Bryce, side note before we get into the LSU stuff, you're obviously a big fan of the NCAA football video game. You do a lot of like dynasty
Yes.
stuff, road to glory stuff. How excited are you for the release of the new game this summer?
Man, look, it's the little kid in all of us, isn't it? I mean, that's like the greatest game ever, and so I'm pumped. I was disappointed during the national championship. I saw your tweets. I saw
Yeah.
everyone's tweets about it. It is what it is. I've already started to lay the framework and the groundwork. I think you know this, but my wife and I are welcoming a little baby girl in June, so I've got to like those late nights when the wife's asleep and I'm gonna have the baby over here in the crib and we're gonna be playing NCAA 25 hopefully. But no, I don't. She's not gonna watch this episode unfortunately. But so don't tell her I said that. But we're trying to lay the groundwork for that. But man, I'm pumped. That game's gonna be awesome.
So, Bryce, moving to all things Bayou Bengals, I want to first ask you about, you mentioned again, this is your first season down at LSU, covering a guy like Jaden Daniels. And again, for your
Mm.
first season, little did you know that you would be following day in, day out a Heisman Trophy winner. What was that like following him week by week? And when did you know that he was having a Heisman caliber season? Because it's one thing to have a good season, it's
Yeah.
one thing to have an all SEC season, but to have a Heisman season and to win the Heisman when your team goes 9-3, like you have to be another level of exceptional, right? Because you know as well as I do, typically the Heisman is the best quarterback on the best team, right? Like your team
Hmm.
needs to do well. We don't see high like back in the day, we saw Heisman winners on 6-6 teams. That just doesn't happen anymore. So following him from start to finish, can you just detail and recollect how special that was? And when did you know that it was a Heisman level type of year for him?
Yes, I'll do it in kind of, three layers here. I mean, we go back to fall camp, and all the talk was this offense felt more comfortable. Jaden felt more comfortable. Felt like that maybe the square peg into the round hole they were trying to fit him in year one, that first 6 weeks, of the 2022 campaign. both Mike Denbrock, Joe Sloan, and Jaden Daniels kind of sat down and said, hey, this is the plan going forward that we need from you. And then Jaden Daniels kind of reiterating, hey, this is kind of where I feel like I fit. And they tailored it towards him. So you could see glimpses in fall camp. But like you know, Chris, I mean, it's one of those things where you can only take so much from seeing guys going against each other in the same uniform. You're ready to kind of, see that. Obviously, the Florida State game, was just – I tell fans, the only reason you even made that game close was because of Jaden Daniels. You go back and look at his numbers. I mean, that's the only reason that game was even close, and no one else really played well. Then you kind of get into the heart of the season, and I was on the field for the Ole Miss game up there, where obviously Ole Miss storms the field, just an unreal atmosphere over there in Oxford, and you kind of got the feeling from there when Ole Miss won that game. It's like, he's going to have an unreal season because they've got 2 losses. If they're going to crash the playoff as the first ever 2-loss team, which was still very much in the cards, you could have beaten Alabama, beaten an undefeated Georgia, and there's a really, really good case for that. But you had the feeling there, it's going to take a special season. And you saw the glimpses. I mean, you go back in some of those throws he makes to Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, they're NFL level throws. We then go to Missouri, and we're up there in Columbia, and I believe it was an 11 a.m. Local time kickoff, and they go down early by like 14, 17 points, and he just wills them back. I mean, they legitimately think he might have broken a rib trying to get into the end zone, and that's the storylines that start to kind of develop. Then you have the Florida game where he just goes off like the 275-yard plus touchdown runs, and I would say in between the Missouri and the Florida game, you're like, okay, he's got a shot. Like, he's got a shot. And that's when, and I want to give credit here to LSU's, media department. They really started to crank up the marketing profile, because until then, and I don't know how much you kind of paid attention to this, until then, you had the Bo Nix, like the bodacious ads, that were in Times Square and stuff like that. But there wasn't a lot of marketing put in by really anybody else. I mean, of course, you had your candidates. That's when they started, that kid Jaden, the little documentary series that I encourage, fans of college football to go check out because it's a great story. But I would say it's the Missouri, the Florida game. In between those, you start to kind of get the feeling of he's got a legitimate shot here. And even though it was a Florida team that really wasn't that great, when you're, setting SEC total yardage, records, I don't care. It's not, it's not a high school football team out there. That's an SEC defense that you're playing. And he made them look like a high school team. And so I think with that, and then, the Texas A&M game, we walked off the field of Texas A&M and he's heading into the locker room. And you kind of get the feeling of like, we've covered this guy all season, but it never really hit us. Hey, this is it. Because, I didn't think he was going to play in the bowl game. And he's walking off. You can tell he's starting to take it in. He and Malik Neighbors have a really kind of cool moment together. Those 2 guys, which are going to be LSU legends forever. And man, it's just, look, you're told not to be a fan, as a reporter, as a media member. But look, it's hard not to root for guys like that. Jaden's such a humble guy, and just kind of see his growth throughout the season. It was really and truly like a blessing just to be a part of that. And that kid is really, really, really talented, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, which obviously helps for the next level as well.
Now, Bryce, it's been a crazy last couple of days going into late last week as Nick Saban officially announced his retirement, walks away from the game. Kalen DeBoer has been hired as Alabama head coach. I first want to get your take on this because, again, you're as tied in with the LSU fan base as anybody. What has been the reaction from LSU fans? Because this is a guy in Nick Saban, right, that we all pay our respects to the GOAT, but I think I posted this late last week and said, hey, listen, there's a ton of SEC fan bases out there that are thrilled. I mean, they're giddy. They're giddy, This guy. He's finally gone. So what's been the reaction from LSU fans? Because I have to imagine, and this thing came out of nowhere, right? Like, we knew this day was coming soon, but for him to actually hang it up, I have to imagine LSU fans, if they're honest, they're like, thank goodness. What have you taken away? Your interactions been like, and just the overall vibe around the Bayou Bengals, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, look, first off, I think that there's some fans have acknowledged that LSU football is what it is because of Nick Saban back in 2003. And there has been a, as much as we couldn't stand the guy when he was in Tuscaloosa, we respect him because he really kind of, LSU has always been a great brand, but you go back to the early 2000s and what he did down here in Baton Rouge and then kind of catapulted them into the Les Miles era, the Ed Orgeron. I mean, it's just been a really successful run of 20 plus years now. So that being said, of course you're right, Chris. I mean, this is a group that is excited. That the big hurdle seems to kind of be gone in the SEC now. For LSU, you go back and look at their history. It has taken historically great performances to beat Alabama. Just like it has for a lot of programs. You go back to Joe Burrow and that crew in 2019, even 2022's team, well, Jaden Daniels and them just kind of, willing that game there towards the end with a great overtime play. So you bring in obviously a guy like Kalen DeBoer, who is going to be a knockdown no matter what. Like, I think that's the one part that LSU fans have said, and I've kind of encouraged them to be like, guys, yeah, Alabama's going to take a step back, but it's because they were at a level nobody in this sport was at for the past decade and a half. I mean, that's just the fact of what this is. So, for LSU fans, they're excited. And then I would kind of, cap that with now's the time. I mean, you see what Brian Kelly has done on the coaching circuit, bringing in Blake Baker from Missouri, bringing in Bo Davis, and then obviously, the cornerbacks coach needing to be the final piece of the puzzle. Look, I mean, the goal is to say, hey, Nick Saban's gone. We know we're going to no divisions. We know Texas and Oklahoma are getting added, but this is a full-on, full court press from Scott Woodward, the AD, Brian Kelly, to say, hey, we want to rise and raise up into that tier one where Alabama once was, to try to, make ourselves the leaders in this new era of SEC football.
Bryce, do you feel like LSU, and again, we're very early on, right? I mean, it's literally middle of January. We got a long way to go until toe meets leather on 2024, although the season never really ends. Like football season, 24/7, 365 with the portal, recruiting, all that good stuff. I say all that to ask you this, though, Bryce. Do you feel like LSU is being a little bit overshadowed, if you will? Or maybe do you think they're going to be underhyped because of what Ole Miss is doing, right? Ole Miss is that team, winners of 11 games, first time in program history, what they've done in the portal. And I mean, I think they deserve the hype, but it's kind of a weird feeling to where, like you mentioned, Nick Saban walks away and LSU wasn't really the first team I thought of as like, who are the biggest winners from this? I thought about the Ole Misses of the world. Like LSU has that 9-win season. They get a 10th win in a bowl game, right? No more Jaden Daniels, no more Malik Neighbors. Garrett Nussmeier takes over. Brian Kelly has done great things to shore up the defensive side. LSU was a team some folks had to win their national championship last year. Like, do you feel like there's a sense of LSU somewhat being overlooked, or at least more than they should be going into this next season?
I think there's some truth to that. I mean, look, this is a headline-dominated industry. So the headline grabbers have been Ole Miss. I mean, with what they've been able to do in the portal. And look, it's a maybe not an orthodox way of, or it's an unorthodox way of building a roster, but Lane Kiffin, I think with the resources they have there, feels like that's the best way to do that. So, of course, I mean, you look at, Ole Miss, Alabama has been their Achilles heel. They've beaten LSU. They beat them this past year, so they may not view LSU as that last stone that they need to cross in order to reach the promised land. It's been Alabama for them. That's been the Achilles heel. So, yeah, well warranted for Ole Miss. But when you talk about LSU, I mean, of course, when you lose the Heisman Trophy winner, you expect a drop off, and no doubt about it. But I think one thing that we were able to see in the bowl game, especially, and I think you talked about this, when you go back to that game winning drive that Garrett Nussmeier put together, a lot of people, and I even said this, are going to brush off, oh, it's Wisconsin, it's a meaningless bowl game. Man, that's not meaningless for the kids and the development of what they do. So it might be meaningless to the fan that says, yeah, I don't really care about it. But for Nussmeier, that really can kickstart what can happen throughout the 2024 season. If you want proof to that, go back to the bowl game the previous year where Malik Neighbors went off against an undermanned Purdue team, but it recruits a Bolitnikoff worthy season, finalist worthy season for a guy that's going to be one of the top 3 or 4 receivers taking in the draft in April. So I don't like the idea that the bowl games don't matter, because I think that LSU can use that and go into 2024 as one of the teams that maybe they're just kind of like this, assassin in the weeds. They're going to try to pick some teams off, and that schedule, it's crazy. It includes now 2 Big Ten games against USC and UCLA in 2024, which is a weird thing to talk about, but it sets up nicely the fact that they get Ole Miss at home, they get Alabama at home. They got to go on the road to A&M. Okay. They got to go to Florida. But, when you just look at and they host Oklahoma at the end of the season. But when you look at it, what they're returning, look, they're returning a quarterback that has all the talent in the world to be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. That's super important. And when you look across the landscape of this conference, the Carson Becks of the world, the Jackson Darts of the world, once you get past those two guys, and I know there's some really good names. I mean, Brady Cook in Missouri, but now you start again. The conversation is after those two guys, where does Garrett Nussmeier fall in the talent category? We've yet to see improvement over the course of a regular season, but there's no denying that he has the talent to be a top 3, top 4 quarterback in this conference.
And Bryce, you mentioned Oklahoma. I want to get your thoughts on that. Oklahoma and Texas obviously joined the league. We got the expanded SEC, and I mean it's going to be. It was already a gauntlet. It was already the best conference in college football. It's even more so now. Your thoughts specifically on those two programs? Texas, a team that just went to the college football playoff. Yes, they fell to Washington, but I think Texas is in prime position. Quinn Ewers is back. Prime position to be one of the mainstays in college football, and I think be right there at the top of the SEC. Oklahoma, a good season, double-digit win season, right? Maybe didn't exactly get where they wanted, but I thought Brent Venables laid a solid foundation for coming into the SEC. If you had to buy stock in one of those two programs that they're going to be, one of the elites in the Southeastern Conference, and this could fluctuate year to year because the SEC, it's going to be so competitive, and I mean the margins are going to be so razor thin. But if you had to buy stock in one of those two that which one of those is going to flourish more so in the conference, who would you take, Texas or Oklahoma?
I think the immediate answer for me has to be Texas. Just with what they have been able to do, coming off a season that it ended not the way you wanted it to. But, before the Nick Saban news, Chris, personally, if you had to put tier levels into the SEC, I would have said, tier level wise, you have Georgia, Alabama, and Texas in terms of financial, opportunity that they have. NIL. I mean, some of the so, some of the money that we're talking about being thrown around that Texas has, it's crazy. It's ridiculous. And so just for me personally, like I just think in terms of potential, that's a tier 1 team that enters, tomorrow. In July 1st, when this thing, kicks off officially or whenever that date is, Texas is in my tier 1 of just with what they have been able to put on the field. Now, obviously losing Bo Davis as defensive line coach, that's going to be something interesting to watch, losing him to now a conference rival in LSU. But Steve Sarkisian, to me, has shown the ability to build a program that can be up there with the elite of the elites. And this is something, too. You talk about what this job means. Chris, when you and I were younger, that burnt orange logo or that burnt orange, uniform meant something to recruits. There was a long time in between where it really didn't. And it's starting to get back to that. So, look, it's only going to help recruiting efforts as they get into the SEC. I think it's going to maybe, personally, I think it could, ding a little bit of the efforts of Texas A&M, that maybe that shiny stuff wears off, and we'll have to kind of monitor that and see. I like Texas as they enter. I don't think Oklahoma's going to be bad, but I think they're going to be, a tier 2, between a tier 2, tier 3 team. The problem is you're talking about some really, really good football teams in that tier 2 to tier 3.
Bryce, it may be strange to some to talk about, Brian Kelly and his job status and expectations going into year 3. But again, this is LSU football, and there are real serious expectations, and especially after you win the SEC West in year 1. I think for most folks down in Baton Rouge fell maybe short of expectations in year 2. I mean, the defense was historically bad, right? And they've taken measures to fix that. When you look at year 3, though, is it college football playoff or bust for Brian Kelly? Like, is that what LSU fans, is that what they need to see? Again, I'm not trying to necessarily start a conversation about, his job is Brian Kelly on the hot seat. Yeah. But I mean, Bryce, as well as I do, man, this is 2024. This is a new age of college football. It's win now or get out. And there's going to be a lot of pressure, I feel like, on Kelly going into this season.
Well, I mean, no doubt. I mean, you're expanding the playoff, and also you're one of the premier brands in the sport. So that right there is, setting the foundation of you have to get there. I would say this. Kelly has done a good job ever since, Ed Orgeron was let go and they went into that bowl game 3 years ago now with like 32 scholarship players, a wide receiver playing quarterback, and you had, just kind of disarray. He's done a good job, I would say, of raising the floor of this program. Now it's time to bust through the ceiling and see where that ceiling is. And the ceiling's a national championship. I wrote about this right after the bowl game. If this team is not contending for the 12-team playoff, there's a problem. And there's going to be conversation because, like you said, it's the nature of the sport that we live in today. So Brian Kelly has to get there. He has been very adamant. This is not a, retire into the sunset of the state of Louisiana, the sportsman paradise type of deal here. I mean, this is he wants to go win a championship. This is why he came down to the SEC. He wanted to compete against the best. He wanted to recruit against the best. And I think for him personally, look, this is a guy in Brian Kelly who has, many people have said he's a prideful guy. He wants to test himself against the best. And so, he did really well at Notre Dame. He did really well at Cincinnati. You go back to Grand Valley State and everything in between. This is a guy who understood how to coach. And he's been doing it for 30 plus years, Chris. He knows what it takes. And I think he's evolving with the times, which is something we've seen a lot of the greats do. That championship trophy has just been elusive to him. So I do believe that it is championship or bust for his career. But what I have said is there's a reason he's being aggressive in the defensive coaching hires for year 3, because year 3 is about the year where you can no longer just rely on, well, it's not our recruits or it's not our guys. I mean, this is his system. And so, this season to me will define maybe year 3 and year 4, you can make an argument, but this year 3 will kind of define what Kelly's legacy in Baton Rouge will be. You got to make the playoff. I mean, I just think that there's no question about it. You got to be one of those 12 teams, playing in the month of January. Regardless if you win the title or not, there's going to be some serious conversation, I think, just about where is this program going if this team rolls in an 8-4 year next year, because that would be well below the standard of what Brian Kelly has publicly put out there that he wants for this program.
The pressure is on in Baton Rouge for Brian Kelly. Bryce, let's move to the hardwood. LSU men's hoops, Matt McMahon. I saw you post about this on social media actually right before you jumped on about the game at Auburn. And there's maybe a handful that would go into Auburn and win a basketball game. But I think LSU's been fairly impressive early on. I think the depth of the conference has really shown early on that, some of these teams, Ole Miss, South Carolina, LSU, even a Georgia that I don't know we had much high hopes for. They've been really, really good. Your early impressions, at least in conference play, of what Matt McMahon and LSU are putting on the floor this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you'd have told fans through the first 3 conference games they'd be sitting 2-1, they probably would have, told you to go check in somewhere, to a hospital.
Match the win total of last year.
Yes. Yeah, so, already. I mean, look, the biggest change for them has been having a ball handler, having a guy that can, come up the floor, direct the offense. And that's been their point guard, Jalen Cook. He was one of those guys that was dealing with that waiver situation throughout the non-conference portion of the schedule, was able to get eligible for, I believe, the final 2 games of the non-con schedule, and then kind of had to sit during the perceived break that they give the kids for exams and Christmas. And then, joined back in an SEC play. They beat A&M, they beat Vanderbilt, and then they lose to Auburn. But even in that game, Chris, I've been in that arena in Auburn. That's one of the craziest environments. You talk about non-blue bloods, and I think Auburn's trending, could trend towards that under Bruce Pearl. But, the traditional blue bloods, Auburn's not one of them. That might be rivaling some of what you see across the country when you talk about environment and atmosphere. So, they went down by like 25, almost 30 points, and they cut it to within manageable. That speaks a lot about what McMahon's plan and vision for this program, is. And so I think in year 2 under McMahon, they've showed some strides. I don't know if anyone has a good idea of where they're going to end up. But, man, if you could be competing for an NIT bid and maybe get an NIT bid, that is huge for the development program. And you mentioned the depth of this conference is really starting to show. Mike White's done a great job over there at Georgia. You look at Mike White's numbers in year 2 of the program. You look at, a program like South Carolina that, an Ole Miss that I think maybe, we'll have to see. And Chris, maybe you have more insight on this of, are those records more inflated because of non-conference? How do they fare in the conference? How do they adapt to conference play? But look, SEC basketball has grown so much, and I think Matt McMahon and LSU are finally turning a corner of, okay, our fans, at least expect us to compete and try for a win and maybe get a win here as we take on these SEC opponents.
Now, Bryce, were you on the LSU beat for the baseball season last year, the national championship? When did you get on the LSU beat?
Last January. So, yeah, man, I rolled in right before opening day. And
great timing.
Wild.
Great time. So my question is this, obviously, and we'll go more in depth on this in a couple of months when baseball season gets rolling. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you win the national title. Paul Skeens has a magical year, right? I mean, how can LSU top that? Like, I mean, I guess the answer is they literally can't. All they can do is hope to repeat it. But, I mean, do LSU fans feel like they have the team to go back-to-back? That's something that hasn't been done in quite a while.
Yeah, we're going to get a chance to talk with Jay Johnson and the coaches, staff, and the players here in about a week or two. But I think just early on, when you look at that roster from the 30,000 foot view, very different. They still have Tommy Tanks, Tommy White. They still have Hayden Travinsky. They've still got some really good bats in that lineup. And I would still say a top three, top four lineup in the SEC. But it's different this year heading into the 2024 campaign. They feel like they've probably got the best pitching staff, which is kind of scary considering what they put out there, last year. They even think it's a deeper pitching staff. Because one of the concerns going into Omaha last year was once you got past Skeens, even Thatcher Hurd and Ty Floyd, you didn't really know that you were going to get dominant performances. Now you did, and that was great. But this year, they bring in, some guys through the portal. They bring in a couple Alabama guys, which I think is going to, help them. A big, tall lefty freshman that is just, Chris, I don't, how much you know about, lefties here, but kid's like 6'5" and he throws like 95, 96. If you're left-handed and you're throwing that hard, you're going to get a look somewhere, whether it's the rotation or the bullpen. So, when you look and see what this group puts out there, they feel like it's more designed to play close baseball games, maybe than the blowouts they were able to play last year. But yeah, look, the expectations at Alex Box this season, it's a natty or bust every single year, and anything else is going to be, short is going to be a disappointment. But that's where you want your program, and LSU is primed, I think, better just about as better as anyone in the country.
Bryce, on a baseball note, are the Braves finally going to get past the Phillies this year? Did the Braves finally get back to the World Series? It's the best roster in baseball, I feel like, maybe outside of the Dodgers. But for whatever reason, man, the Phillies have the Braves number of late.
Yeah, man, it's been disappointing to see. The past 2 years has been frustrating, and I'll even say this, and I think this is okay to say on the show, but I'll limit it for if there's younger viewers. Braves need a little bit of that FU mentality. The Phillies had it, with Castellanos and all those guys. I think Atlanta got a little bit away from that. With everything. I like that. I like the flair. I like that. I think you need that in the postseason, especially when you're going up against the best, and you need some motivation, you need some confidence. We'll see. Look, this team's obviously proven, Chris, what they can do in the regular season. I think a lot of fans, unfortunately, and I won't be one of these, but I think a lot of the casual fans will be, they'll kind of tune out the regular season because they'll want to see what happens in October, and that makes sense. But, man, I was talking with my dad the other day who grew up in the the age of the 80s before that run in the 90s, and the 70s and 80s for the Braves were not kind. He said, Bryce, enjoy this. Enjoy that game in July when Atlanta wins 7-1 over the Marlins and just flexes their muscles, because you don't get that, and you're living in the midst of a pretty nice run regardless of how many trophies are hoisted up at the end of the year.
Yeah, Bryce, it's the greatest compliment I think you can give, that the real season for a team like the Braves, or we see other teams in college sports, it doesn't begin until the postseason, but then it's kind of it's kind of sad, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what you have till it's gone, to your point. I think back to like 2015 when the Braves had, I think Freddie Freeman was a young player and they were winning like 65 games. So just, like you mentioned, you're knocking on the door of 100 wins. Just enjoy it. Don't lose sight of what you got. Bryce Koon does a fantastic job covering all things LSU and SEC ball in general. Bryce, let folks know where they can find your work. Obviously, you're not just doing stuff with 24/7 Sports. You've got the Crowded Booth as well, where you talk some Georgia Tech flavor. Just again, let everybody know all the great things you're doing.
Yeah, man. You can follow me at Twitter at Bryce_Koon. Obviously, posting a lot of LSU content over there. If you're a 24/7 Sports subscriber already, maybe you're a South Carolina fan or a fan of another SEC program, you can check out the content we have over there. That's one of the great things about the network. And then, our YouTube channel, our own personal podcast that, man, we really started to kind of take a little bit more seriously this fall, which was a ton of fun. Two good friends of mine, talking college football, talking shop, and man, it's a lot of fun. We talk Braves over there. It's I would say it's a Georgia centered sports show, but we dabble in the SEC, we dabble in some other things as well. And man, it's been a lot of fun. Chris, I know you started this new venture, and there's nothing better than just hopping on and talking ball. It's what we all did at the lunch table as kids, and now folks want to pay us to do it. I'm down.
Indeed. Bryce, you're the man. I appreciate it. We'll do it again soon. Keep up the great work, my friend, and congrats on your success. It's well-deserved.
Appreciate it, Chris. You have a great rest of your day.